They called it Legends and Legacy, a name that hung heavy in the desert air like dust waiting to rise. It was the first reunion tournament of its kind, bringing together old warriors and new kings under the same lights. Las Vegas had seen its share of fights, but tonight felt different. The arena wasn't packed with tourists or gamblers. It was filled with fighters. Trainers, old fans, sons sitting beside fathers who had once traded leather under these same lights. There was a hum in the air thick with memory, the kind that only comes when you know you're standing at the edge of something that won't come again. Some came to honor the past. Others came to bury it. Then he walked in. No lights. No music. Just Chuck Norris, quiet as a shadow stepping through the side entrance near the loading dock. His jeans were plain. Jacket zipped halfway. No entourage. No flash. Just those eyes, steady, watching everything, like he'd seen it all before, and was in no hurry to see it again. A few heads turned. A couple of trainers nudged each other. An older man near the ring said low, "That's him. That's Chuck." He nodded to no one in particular, just found a folding chair near the warm-up mats and sat. No phone, no noise. His hands rested on his knees like he'd done this 1,000 times and never needed to announce it once. Across the arena, the opposite kind of storm was forming. Dax Rivera was all noise. Cameras followed him from the lobby like bees to sugar. He slapped hands, winked at girls, and posed with kids. 28 shredded world champion in 3 divisions. He had charm. He had kicks like pistons. And he had a mouth that never ran dry. He strutted in with gold headphones hanging off his neck shades on despite the dim light. His tracksuit looked custom. Black with gold trim. On the back, stitched in bold letters, "Out with the old." He scanned the room like it was a stage built for him alone. Every lens found him. He wanted them to. Then his eyes landed on Chuck. He squinted like trying to place a forgotten face, then laughed a little under his breath. He turned to his coach and said, just loud enough for the closest cameras to catch it, "Is that the cowboy from the reruns?" The joke hung there, light but sharp. Just a breeze, but it shifted the air. Chuck didn't move, didn't blink, just kept watching the younger fighters warm up. Calm, unshaken, like he'd heard every version of that line for the last 40 years and knew how little it ever meant. But the room heard it. And so did the fighters. One kid stopped his shadowboxing. Another paused mid-stretch. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Dax kept walking, smirking now, chewing gum like a drummer tapping a rhythm. He threw a few lazy jabs at the air as he passed the center ring. You could tell he felt like the main event, like history had nothing to teach him, like it should get out of the way. Chuck glanced up just once, not to respond, just to see the measure of the man behind the words, then looked away, slow and quiet, like the page had been turned. An old trainer named Sal stood near the rails, shaking his head. He'd seen this before. Pride was walking into the fire thinking it was untouchable. By nightfall, the press conference room was full. Fighters lined the stage, legends on one side, rising star on the other hand. Flash bulbs went off like popcorn. Chuck took his seat near the end, away from the spotlight. When they called his name, he nodded once, nothing more. No speech, no stories, just presence. Dax took the mic like a comedian hitting a late-night set. He talked fast, smiled widely, said it was an honor, sure, but added that the future didn't live in the past. He leaned forward at one point, eyes cutting down the line. Some of these legends are great, real pioneers, but let's be honest, time only moves forward, and sometimes you gotta let the old dogs rest. The room tensed. Chuck didn't flinch. He wasn't there to win an argument. He wasn't there to chase ghosts or settle scores. He was there because martial arts wasn't something you retired from. It lives in your bones. It becomes how you stand, how you breathe, how you look a man in the eye when he forgets where he came from. Outside, the sun had dipped below the desert horizon, painting the sky in orange and violet. The lights of Vegas started blinking to life, neon and noise. But inside that arena, the real fire was quiet. It sat still in a folding chair, hands resting on old knees, watching, waiting. And across the room, Pride walked taller, not knowing yet that the fuse had been lit. The arena lights dropped to black, and a beat kicked in so loud it shook the floor under people's feet. Strobes fired across the crowd. Music blared with a thumping bass line, and smoke rolled in from the sides of the stage like something out of a music video. Then Dax Rivera appeared. He rose through the floor on a lit platform, spinning a staff over his head like a showman at a halftime performance. His uniform wasn't traditional. It looked more like something off a designer runway. Black and silver with sharp edges and neon trim that caught every light. The crowd roared. Younger fans stood to their feet, phones out cheering like they'd just seen a rock star take the stage. You could feel its pulse, the way the energy leaned hard into the spectacle. Dax didn't just walk out. He danced. He spun, kicked, and flipped through the air like he was choreographing a music video instead of honoring a martial arts legacy. Every move was sharp, clean, and practiced down to the muscle twitch. He hit the floor and spun into a rising tornado kick, then landed on one knee with his arms stretched wide. The crowd exploded again, part amazed, part dazzled, all locked in. But for those who'd been around the arts long enough, something felt off. It was all flash, no stillness, no breath between beats, no sense of center. Dax stood up slowly, letting the cheers roll over him like heat from the stage lights. He looked into the crowd with a grin that didn't hide a thing. Then he turned toward the long row of chairs behind the ringside barricade. Chuck sat in the third seat from the left, same chair as before, same calm as before. Not clapping, not moving, just watching. Dax raised a mic. "Y'all like that?" he said, smiling widely. The crowd answered with noise. Cameras flashed. Dax held the moment like a man holding court. He raised his hands, signaling for the crowd to settle. "Let me ask you something. We came here to celebrate martial arts, right? To honor what came before." He paused, eyes scanning the room. Some clapped again, unsure where this was going. Others leaned in, sensing something sharper coming. "Well, I got mad respect for the old-timers," he said, pacing now. They paved the road. But let's be real. Nobody's driving a horse and buggy down the strip tonight. A mix of laughter and murmurs ran through the audience. He didn't stop there. Look, I know we've got legends in the room, and one in particular sitting real quiet back there watching like it's still 1973. He pointed directly toward Chuck. The cameras followed his hand. We all grew up on the guy. Beards, boots, bad guys flying through windows. But this is a new age. Fighters train smarter, hit harder, move faster. The crowd reacted fast. Cheers from the younger fans, but a ripple of gasps, too. A few boos rose up from the sides where older guests sat stiff and frowning. Dax leaned into it. Let's stop pretending a roundhouse from the 70s still means something in the cage today. Legacy's cool, but relevance. That's earned right now, not 50 years ago. Chuck didn't move. His hands stayed on his knees, eyes fixed on Dax with the same quiet patience he'd carried in with him. Dax looked straight at him. You taught the world how to fight on film. I'll show 'em how it's done for real. That line cracked the room open. Some jumped to their feet cheering like it was a wrestling promo. Others sat back folding arms, the tension climbing fast. A few legends standing along the wall exchanged glances. Not surprised. Just disappointed. Dax tossed the mic up and caught it, then handed it off without looking back. He bowed fast to the crowd. Not a deep bow, just enough to say he'd finished his act. Then he walked off the mat, chest high, jaw tight, face locked in confidence. The swagger in his step said he thought he'd won the moment, like calling out a lion meant you could take its place. Chuck still didn't move. The noise settled slowly. Some fans whispered. Others looked around unsure of what they were supposed to feel. The split was clear now. Admiration on one side, disrespect on the other. And in between it all, a growing silence where something deeper was stirring. Chuck finally blinked. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He whispered something to the trainer beside him. Nothing loud, just a few words and a small nod. The trainer nodded back, then stood and walked off, disappearing down the corridor behind the warm-up mats. Nobody knew what had just been said, but you could feel it. Something shifted. Not like a punch, more like a tide turning. Quiet. Slow. Unstoppable. Dax had danced in the firelight. He just hadn't noticed yet that the coals were still burning. The next morning, the arena buzzed like it had never gone to sleep. Word had spread fast. Dax Rivera, in front of thousands, had called out Chuck Norris by name. Some thought it was just for show. Others weren't so sure. Cameras circled like vultures waiting for an answer that hadn't come. Chuck arrived the same way he always did. Through the back. No lights, no noise. Just a man in a worn jacket and quiet shoes walking like the floor had known him a long time. He sat in the same seat, same posture. His hands rested on his knees, eyes steady. You could tell he wasn't here for the crowd. He was here for something older. A few organizers approached him, faces tight. They crouched low beside his chair, talking quietly. Their words didn't reach the mics, but their hands moved in that way people do when they're asking for something they know they shouldn't. Chuck shook his head once. Not rude, just clear. He wasn't here for a show. He didn't need to prove anything. Time had already spoken. But the organizers pressed again. This wasn't just about ego now, they said. The air in the arena had shifted. People were turning what Dax said into gospel. They needed balance. Not a fight, just a moment. A reminder. Chuck looked out at the ring. A group of kids had just finished a kata demonstration. Their bows were deep. Their movements were rough but honest. You could see the effort in every line of their stance. They looked toward the crowd, hoping for approval. Most eyes weren't on them. They were waiting for something louder. He sighed barely, then nodded once. He stood up slowly. No stretch, no ceremony. Just stood, walked to the locker room, and disappeared through the hallway like it was any other day. 30 minutes later, the ring was cleared. A mic came to life over the main speakers. Dax's voice came through first. Loud, confident. No backing down. "I hear we got company," he said, pacing the mat with a loose bounce in his step. "They tell me the legend's gonna bless us with a little demo. So I hope he brought more than bedtime stories." The crowd reacted fast. Half cheers, half discomfort. A few older martial artists in the front row stayed silent. Not out of fear, out of respect for what was about to be twisted. Chuck stepped out of the tunnel. No music, no announcer. Just the sound of his boots brushing canvas. He wore a plain gi, white, no patches. The belt faded like it had been through decades of sweat and memory. His hair was short, beard trimmed, face calm. He stepped into the ring and bowed. Not to Dax, to the space, to the history, to every fighter who had once stood there and given their full heart. Dax bowed back, half casual, already bouncing on the balls of his feet. He smiled widely, like he knew how this story ended. Chuck didn't bounce, didn't move much at all, just found his stance. Feet rooted, hands up relaxed like he wasn't fighting, just listening. The bell didn't ring. It wasn't that kind of match. Dax threw the first strike. A round kick, light but flashy, meant more for the crowd than for contact. Chuck slid back, not fast, just enough. No block, no counter, just space. Dax smiled. Threw another. A jab. Then a spinning back fist that ended in a flourish. Still no hit. Chuck moved like he was brushing dust off a shelf. Quiet, smooth, like his body knew how to avoid damage without thinking. The crowd leaned in. Nobody was sure if anything was happening, but it was just not in the way they expected. Dax stopped frowning now. Threw a sharper combo. This time Chuck stepped in. One short parry. A shift in weight. And Dax's arm stopped cold in the air. The younger man blinked just for a second, then pulled back and reset. Chuck didn't move, just stood, breathing steadily, hands still raised. The crowd had gone quiet. Dax moved again, faster this time. A kick, a low sweep, a sudden high strike aimed near the shoulder. Chuck blocked one, dodged one, then stepped in close. His hand touched Dax's chest. Open palm. No strike. Just contact. He held it there for half a breath, then stepped back. Dax froze. Not hurt, but changed. He didn't know why it shook him, but it did. Chuck lowered his hands, bowed once, turned to the crowd, bowed again, then walked out of the ring. No words, no stare down, just the silence of something real filling a space that had been too loud. The organizers looked relieved. The crowd was stunned. Some clapped. Some didn't know how. But the older ones, they nodded, because they knew. Chuck hadn't answered the challenge with power. He had answered it with presence, with a reminder that real strength doesn't shout. It just stands, and when it moves, you feel it in your bones. The lights dimmed just enough to pull the edges of the crowd into shadow. The arena was loud, but not with cheers. It was that restless kind of noise that comes before something people aren't sure they want to see. Dax stood at center stage under a single spotlight bouncing in place. His fists clenched and relaxed his jaw tight behind a smirk he was working hard to keep. He had just finished talking again. No mic this time, just loud enough for the cameras and the people in the first few rows to hear. He wanted it official. He wanted Chuck to come back not for a spar, but for real. 1 round, no gloves, no point system, just man to man. The crowd shifted like air trying to find the right pressure. Some cheered, some didn't. Most just waited. Then a door near the side of the arena opened. He didn't walk in fast. He didn't stride or pose or let anyone announce him. He just walked. No guy, no warm-up gear, just jeans, a dark shirt, and boots that sounded soft against the floor. He walked across the mat like it was any other day. Like nothing about this meant more than it needed to. But the moment changed anyway. The crowd went quiet. Not all at once. It faded slowly like a tide pulling back without warning. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones lowered. Even the flashing lights paused, unsure what to do with a man who didn't ask for them. Dax turned and saw him coming. He stopped bouncing. Chuck didn't stare him down. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't change his pace. He just stepped into the spotlight and stood across from the younger man, still, balanced, like a tree that had outlived every storm. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then Chuck looked him in the eye, not with anger, not with a challenge, just with the kind of quiet weight that comes from knowing something the other man doesn't. He spoke once. The fight is never up there. That was all. But it landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Dax blinked. His body tensed like he'd heard a sound he didn't expect from someone he thought he understood. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't gasp. They just froze. That sentence sat in the middle of the room like a truth nobody had ever said out loud before. The noise from earlier didn't belong here anymore. The lights didn't feel like a show now. The mat didn't feel like a stage. It felt like ground. Chuck didn't add a second line. He didn't need to. He just stood there. And in that silence, something shifted. Not in the arena, in the people. The old fighters in the front row sat up straighter. The younger ones lowered their phones. Even Dax, for a breath, didn't know what to say. There are some moments that don't need more words, they just need to be seen. And this was one of them. The room was holding its breath. Chuck and Dax faced each other at the center of the mat. No bell rang. No one gave a signal. They just moved when it felt right. Dax started first. His foot slid forward, then snapped into a lightning-fast side kick. Sharp, clean, the kind of technique that wins medals and lights up slow-motion replays. But it meant nothing. Chuck wasn't there. He had stepped out of range without rushing. A soft turn of the hip, a half step. It looked like he had known exactly where the kick would land before Dax even threw it. Dax followed with a back fist. Quick, straight from the shoulder. Chuck leaned back an inch. Just enough. The strike passed in front of his face like wind. No counter, no reaction. He didn't move to win. He moved to stay clear. The crowd was quiet again. Not from confusion this time. They were watching something they didn't fully understand, but couldn't stop looking at. Dax reset. He fired off a spinning heel kick that curved wide and fast, his heel cutting through the air like a blade. Chuck didn't block. He dipped his weight just slightly and let it pass over his shoulder. His body was still the whole time. Only his feet shifted. Just enough. Dax was breathing harder now. He circled, switched stance, tried a fake, then a jab, then a roundhouse. All of them are crisp. All of them fast. But none of them landed. Chuck wasn't running. He wasn't dodging like a man escaping danger. He was guiding space, reading it. Each time Dax struck, it was like aiming at a shadow that moved 1 second before the light caught it. Still no counters, still no strikes from Chuck, just presence. The kind that made the space around him feel smaller. The kind that made Dax's every move look just a little louder, a little more desperate. Someone in the crowd whispered, "He's not fighting him. He's showing him." Dax kept going. He tried a burst of combinations. Elbows, knees, a low kick to the thigh. Chuck slid back, then in, then pivoted in silence. One hand floated up, not to strike, just to guide Dax's wrist past his shoulder. It was control without contact, power without pressure. By now, the crowd had shifted from watching a fight to witnessing something else, something quieter, older. They started to lean in, not for the next hit, but for the next move, the next breath. Every small motion from Chuck pulled more attention than Dax's loudest strikes. You could feel it in the room. This was not about who was faster, or younger, or stronger. It was about who was still. Dax paused for a second, chest rising and falling. His eyes darted, trying to read the space, trying to figure out how a man not throwing a single strike was slowly taking control of the entire rhythm. Chuck took a step forward, not aggressive, just enough to close the distance. Dax flinched, not big, just enough. The crowd saw it, and something changed. The awe didn't come from fear. It came from realization. That stillness wasn't the absence of action. It was the command of it. Chuck wasn't avoiding the fight. He was shaping it. With every breath, every angle, every inch of weight is on the balls of his feet. And then he stopped moving. Dax stood across from him, arms half raised, unsure of what was happening. He looked like a man holding his breath underwater, unsure if he should rise or keep sinking. Chuck looked at him. No challenge in his eyes, just clarity. It was enough. Dax lowered his arms. Just a little. The room didn't cheer, didn't shout. They sat in that silence, holding it like something fragile, because they had just seen a man win a battle without landing a single blow. Dax moved again, fast and tight, trying to catch a rhythm. His strikes had lost some of their sharpness, not from fatigue, but from doubt. Chuck stayed calm. Each movement was small, measured, like every step had already been taken in his mind. Then, between motions, Chuck spoke. Power isn't pressure. It's precision. The words didn't rise in volume. They landed softly but clean, like a drop hitting still water. Dax hesitated. His next punch came late. Wide. It was blocked without force. It was just gently redirected. Like Chuck had known where the punch would end before Dax even decided to throw it. Chuck didn't follow up. He just stepped around and kept his eyes on him. Dax blinked hard. His jaw clenched. He fired another combo out of instinct, more speed than intent. Chuck caught his wrist and guided it past his shoulder. Don't chase the hand. Read the brief. That line hit deeper. Dax stumbled a half step, not from contact but from inside. His hands dropped just a little as he circled again. You could see the shift starting. He wasn't worried about losing. He was wondering if he even knew what winning meant anymore. Chuck didn't press in. He moved like he was shaping the air, not the man. Still relaxed, still reading. Dax launched a spinning elbow. It whistled past Chuck's ear and met nothing. He landed off balance. Chuck touched his shoulder and steadied him. Then he said it. You're not fighting me. You're fighting who you think you need to be. Dax froze. His chest heaved. His stance fell apart. The arena had gone silent again, not with tension now, but something quieter, almost sacred. Chuck stepped back, hands still raised but soft. Dax didn't strike. He stood there breathing hard, staring at the mat between them like it held an answer he hadn't seen before. His eyes lifted. Not angry, just lost. Chuck didn't speak again. He didn't need to, because the words were still echoing. Each one had pulled something out from under Dax. Not to break him, to show him. The crowd stayed quiet. Even the cameras felt farther away now. There was no fight left in the room, only reflection. And that was enough. Dax stood motionless, arms slack at his sides. His chest rose and fell, not with exhaustion, but with something heavier. The ring felt smaller now. Chuck looked at him, not as an opponent, not as a lesson, just as a man. Then he stepped in close, calm, unrushed. He lifted his hand and gently placed it on Dax's shoulder. No weight, just contact, like setting a hand on someone who's come through a long storm. His voice came quietly, steady. Now, just be here. That was it. Dax's body stilled, completely. His eyes closed for half a second, then opened again. But they were different now. The fight was gone, not beaten. Let go. He sank to one knee, not in shame, not in pain, just in surrender. Like something inside him had finally let go of the need to prove, to perform, to hold. The arena didn't move. Not a shout. Not a single clap. Just silence. Clean and full. Then someone in the back stood and began to clap. Slow. Not showy. Just true. Another joined. Then more. Until the sound filled the room not like thunder, but like waves rolling in. Deep. Measured. Lasting. Chuck didn't turn to the crowd. He kept his hand there a moment longer, then stepped back. Let Dax breathe. Let him rise on his own. But Dax didn't move right away. He stayed there, one knee on the mat, head bowed, not in defeat, in peace. Because for the first time since walking into the spotlight, he wasn't performing. He wasn't climbing. He wasn't running from something he couldn't name. He was just there, present. And in that stillness, everyone watching understood. This had never been a fight. It had been a return. The locker room was cold and quiet. Dax sat on a bench near the corner, elbows on his knees, head down. The noise of the arena felt miles away. No cameras, no music, just the sound of the pipes humming faintly in the walls. His gloves were off. His wraps are undone. His knuckles were still red, not from impact, but from holding too tight for too long. He stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else. This was the first time he had been still all night. Maybe the first time in years. No trainers, no entourage. No one is waiting for a photo. Just him. And the quiet. At first, it pressed in, like a weight. Not loud, but heavy in a way that made him feel small. He tried to breathe it away. That tightness in his chest. But it stayed. He thought of his father. The way he used to sit on the porch with a beer in one hand and nothing to say. The way his eyes seemed to look through him. Not angry. Just not there. Dax had spent his whole life trying to be loud enough to be noticed. Fast enough to be chased. Good enough to be loved. Every trophy had been a question. Do you see me now? Each belt was a brick he stacked between himself and that silence. Tonight, it all cracked. He didn't lose. There had never been anything to win. But something inside him had folded. Quietly. Like a page turning without sound. He thought about the first time he hit a bag. 11 years old. Alone in the garage. He had punched until his hands bled because he liked the way it drowned out the yelling in the next room. He remembered his first fight. Amateur circuit. He didn't win pretty, but he won. And when they raised his hand, he felt taller than the ring ropes. That night, his mom called him champ. First time she called him anything with pride. So he kept going. Faster, sharper, louder. The performances got bigger. The lights are brighter. The voice in his head was screaming just to stay visible. But now there was nothing left to chase. That stillness Chuck carried, the kind that didn't need to be seen to be known, it had cracked something wide open inside him. He wiped his face with the towel around his neck. Not from sweat. He wasn't tired. He was bare. The silence wasn't the absence of noise anymore. It was a mirror. He saw himself for the first time without all the shine. The locker room smelled like old tape and rubber mats. The walls were faded. One of the fluorescent lights above flickered every few seconds. But in that quiet space, he felt more real than he ever had under the spotlight. He thought of Chuck's hand on his shoulder, the weightless touch, the voice that said, "Just be here." He hadn't understood it then. He did now. He wasn't angry. He wasn't proud. He wasn't broken. He was still. And in that stillness, something inside him began to breathe for the first time. Chuck stepped into the locker room without a sound. His boots moved quietly over the tile, slow and certain. He didn't say anything right away. Dax didn't look up. He knew who it was. You could feel Chuck's presence before he spoke, like still water that ran deep. Chuck sat down beside him on the bench. Not across from him. Not above him. Just next to him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Chuck leaned forward, forearms on his knees. He kept his eyes on the floor when he began. "I was 26. Hungry like you. Fast. Proud. Always trying to climb something even when I didn't know what it was." Dax listened. Didn't move. He didn't need to. The tone in Chuck's voice was enough to pull him in. "There was a man who taught me more than anyone else ever did. He never raised his voice, never showed off. But every time we trained, he showed me exactly who I was, and exactly how far I still had to go." Chuck paused and ran his hand across his jaw like he was brushing the memory back into place. "For years I wanted to beat him, not to hurt him. I just wanted to be able to say I had. I thought if I could put him down, then maybe that meant I was finally enough. One day it happened. I caught him, clean, dropped him in front of a full room. He nodded, got up, smiled, said I had done well. But the look in his eyes, it wasn't pride. It wasn't fair either. It was quiet, like something had closed. Chuck looked down at his hands, opened them. Then I closed them again. He never trained with me again after that. Not once. He wasn't angry. He just stepped back. And I spent the next 20 years learning what I had lost that day." Dax blinked. Just once. His breath came a little deeper. He didn't interrupt. Chuck turned his head slightly, just enough to let his voice soften. "I won the moment, but I lost the man who had given me everything." He sat back. Let that sit in the air between them. It wasn't said with sadness, just the truth, like someone who had carried it long enough that it didn't hurt the same, but it still weighed the same. He looked at Dax now. "I didn't come out there today to win. I came because I saw that same fire in your eyes, the kind that burns fast, hot, loud. until one day it burns through something you can't fix. He didn't preach. He didn't offer advice. He just shared it, like passing a cup of water to someone who had been running too long without knowing they were thirsty. Dax finally turned his head. Just a little. His eyes were glassy but clear. Chuck gave a small nod. You're not lost. You just stopped listening to the quiet. Then he stood. No ceremony, no farewell. He let the silence return, but this time it felt different. Not empty, just still. Chuck stood at the door for a moment longer, his hand resting lightly on the frame. The hallway behind him was dim and quiet. His voice came low, just loud enough for Dax to hear. I've got a place out near the hills. Nothing fancy, no gym banners, no mirrors. He waited. Dax didn't move. I just watched the floor and it seemed like it might speak first. You could come out for a while, not to train harder, not to fight better, just to learn how to be still. Chuck turned slightly halfway through the doorway. He let that invitation hang like a thread. No cameras, no interviews, no announcements. You show up, or you don't. That's the deal. He didn't look back, just gave a soft nod toward the silence. Then he left. The door stayed open behind him. Dax stared at it for a long time, not because he didn't understand, but because for the first time in his life, someone had offered him a path with no spotlight waiting at the end. Just breathe. Just space. His fists unclenched, slowly. And his chest, for the first time all day, felt light. The road turned to gravel about 10 miles before anything looked like civilization. Dax drove slowly. Windows cracked the mountain air, cutting in cold and sharp. The GPS stopped working halfway up the hill. No signal. No Wi-Fi. No noise. He pulled up to a long wooden cabin surrounded by tall pines and stone paths. It didn't look like a dojo. It looked like something built to last through winters no one talked about. Chuck met him on the porch. He didn't smile, didn't speak much, just nodded once and motioned him inside. The floor creaked with history. The walls were lined with old tools, paper scrolls, and simple wooden beams darkened with time. There were no trophies, no belts, no mirrors. Dax set his bag down in the corner. He stood waiting, expecting something. Instructions. A schedule. A welcome. Chuck walked past him and opened the back door. Morning light poured in. He pointed to a pile of logs stacked near a stump, then walked away. Dax stood there a second longer before following. He picked up the axe. The handle was smooth-worn from years of hands that knew how to hold it. He swung once, then again. The rhythm was off. The blade stuck halfway through. He looked up. Chuck was sweeping the dojo floor in long, steady strokes. No words, no glances, just rhythm. That was the first morning. The second started before the sun. Chuck knocked once on his door and moved on. Dax got up dressed and stepped outside. The air bit hard. His breath hung like smoke. Chuck was already seated on the deck legs, crossed, eyes closed. Dax stood awkwardly, unsure whether to sit or wait. He sat. Nothing was said for 20 minutes, maybe longer. Just breathe. Just silence. After that came tea. Chuck brooded on a small gas stove, pouring it slowly. There was lye sugar, no small talk. They drank in silence. The warmth in the cup slowly reached Dax's fingers. He kept waiting for the part where the training began. But it didn't. Instead, he swept the floor, chopped more wood, pulled weeds from the edge of the garden that wrapped around the house like a quiet fence. The third day, he found a small handwritten list on his door. Clean the windows, heat water, fold the towels in the side room. No signature, no instructions. By the end of the week, Dax hadn't thrown a single punch. His body was sore not from combat, but from labor, the kind of work that doesn't give you adrenaline, just slow effort. The quiet got louder. There were moments he almost broke. He nearly asked, "What are we doing? Why am I here?" But Chuck never offered an answer. Only presence. Every day I moved the same way. Wake up, sit in silence, chop, clean, move, breathe. It was like living inside a drum beat so slow you couldn't tell it was music. At night, Dax lay in the small guest room with no screen and no sounds, just wind through the pine boards and the creak of wood settling with age. He thought of the ring, the roar, the weight of eyes watching every move, and how far away it all felt now. Each task was the same, but somehow it stopped feeling pointless. He wasn't learning moves. He was learning rhythm, not of fighting, of being. Chuck never praised, never corrected. He just watched. Sometimes he stood near the window and sipped his tea as Dax swept. Sometimes he disappeared for hours and Dax worked alone. But the silence started to feel different. Not empty, just honest. It was day 16 when the restlessness got the better of him. Dax had been sweeping the same hallway for almost an hour with slow strokes, a quiet room, and dust rising in the slant of morning light. Outside, Chuck was splitting logs like always with the same rhythm and the same breath. But something in Dax stirred. He had checked his phone that morning even though he told himself he wouldn't. No texts, no mentions. A few old notifications from days ago are already fading. The world was moving without him. He opened his camera, propped the phone on the windowsill just right at an angle low, catching the cab in the garden and him in the middle of it. He didn't speak, just started recording, then quietly switched it to live stream. His hands kept working, but inside his pulse picked up. It wasn't about attention. At least that's what he told himself. He just wanted someone out there to know he was still here, still trying, still alive. A few comments popped in. Fire emojis, laughing ones. Someone said, "Respect, bro." Another asked if Chuck was nearby. He read them between sweeps. Then the screen froze. The connection dropped. Dax looked up. Chuck was standing in the doorway. He didn't say anything right away. His hands were empty, but his presence filled the room. He looked at the phone, then back at Dax. "You're still performing." His voice was low, calm, no edge in it. Chuck stepped forward, picked up the phone, turned it over in his palm, and set it on the bench. Then he looked Dax in the eye. "Come back when you want to disappear." That was all. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't walk away fast. He just turned and left the room. Dax stood still for the long time. The silence after that line was louder than any crowd. He picked up the phone. The screen had gone dark. No signal. No comments. Just his own face reflected back at him. That night he packed his things. He folded his clothes slowly, rolled the wraps he hadn't used. He tucked them deep in the bag with the water bottle and the spare socks, but he never touched them. Chuck didn't stop him. Didn't come to the door. Didn't say goodbye. Dax walked to his car under a sky full of stars so bright it hurt to look at them too long. He sat behind the wheel engine, cold hands on the wheel but not turning the key. Because something had cracked. Not from rejection, from truth. And that truth didn't shout. It just sat there beside him, steady and real. He wasn't ready to disappear. But for the first time, he understood why that mattered. The sky was still dark when the tires crunched over gravel again. No headlights, no music. Just the soft hum of an engine rolling up the long drive. Dax stepped out and shut the door behind him without a sound. His breath clouded in the cold. He slung the same worn duffel over his shoulder and walked up the familiar path. The porch light was off. No one was waiting. He opened the door gently and stepped inside. Nothing had changed. The same wooden walls. The same scent of tea and pine. He placed the bag down in the same corner, took off his jacket, folded it neatly, sat on the floor. Outside, through the thin paper windows, the first light was rising over the mountains. Chuck was already seated on the back deck. Dax walked out barefoot, each step quiet on the cold planks. He didn't speak, didn't ask. He sat beside him, crossed his legs, closed his eyes. Chuck didn't turn. But after a moment, he nodded once. Nothing more. No welcome. No lesson. No explanation. Just breathe. And space. The wind moved through the trees above like a whisper that didn't need words. The world was awake, but still. They stayed that way until the sun crested over the ridge. And for the first time, Dax didn't need to be seen. He was simply there, present, still. Enough. The sun was just setting behind the Vegas skyline when Dax stepped through the side entrance of the arena. No cameras were waiting. No crowd gathered around him. He carried nothing but a small black duffel and the same calm in his chest that had followed him down the mountain. The air was dry, filled with the low hum of lights warming up above the floor. It all felt familiar, but lighter somehow. There were a few nods from staff. No flashes. No calls of his name. He offered a quiet smile, then kept walking. Not to backstage, not to prep, just to the mat. The second Legends and Legacy event had grown larger. The banners were taller. The guest list is longer. But the heart of it felt more grounded. Chuck was already seated ringside. Same spot as before. Hands resting on his knees, eyes steady. Dax gave him a small nod as he passed. Chuck nodded back. Nothing more needed. The announcer's voice rose through the air like an echo, clear and even. He introduced the opening demonstration with no build-up, no flair, just the name. Dax Rivera. No title, no weight class. Just a man. Dax stepped out into the circle slowly and in a balanced manner. He wore plain black pants and a loose white top sleeves rolled at the wrists. His hair was tied back. His breath was even. He bowed to the space, not to the audience. Then he moved. It wasn't flashy. There were no flips, no spins, no hard strikes. Each movement unfolded like a breath, a shifting of weight, a press of the heel, a small rotation of the hip that pulled the rest of him forward without resistance. He flowed through a silent kata built from simplicity. Blocks, transitions, extensions of the body that looked like wind moving through cloth. You could hear every footstep. The arena stayed still. People watched like they were inside something sacred, not a show. By the end, Dax stood center, palms open, back straight, still. He bowed once, then stepped to the edge where a small stand held a single card. He lifted it, walked to the center, set it down with care, then left. No music played, no fireworks, just silence until the first hand started clapping slowly from the back row. Then others joined. It wasn't wild. It wasn't explosive. It was warm, measured, deep. When the applause faded, a few people leaned in to read the card left behind. Plain white. Black letters printed small. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what leaves you. No signature, just words. Dax walked through the back hallway without hurry. He didn't stop to greet reporters. He didn't need to. He had said what mattered. And this time he wasn't walking away from anything. He was walking in peace. The lights in the arena softened, not dimmed but lowered just enough to let the space breathe. There was no spotlight, no dramatic voice calling out names, just a quiet shift in attention as Dax stepped barefoot onto the mat. He moved with no urgency, no posture, no tension in his frame. His eyes didn't scan the crowd. He looked down, then out across the mat, and stopped. He bowed. Slow. Deep. His palms pressed gently along the sides of his legs, back, folded low still. It wasn't for show. It wasn't for them. It was for the practice. For the space. For the 1,000 hours that came before this moment. And the 1,000 more that would follow after he was gone. When he rose, another figure stepped forward. A younger fighter. Early 20s, sharp lines in his stance, nervous energy in his breath. Dax nodded to him, calm and steady. They touched hands. Then they began. It wasn't a fight. It was a rhythm. A shared pace. A slow unfolding of timing and distance and feel. Dax didn't strike hard. He didn't need to. His hands floated redirected, softened. The younger fighter moved quickly, sharply, eager to show precision. Dax met it with quiet. He turned his body without force. He let the energy pass through, not into. Each movement was clean. No clash. No swing meant to land heavily. It was two bodies reading each other breath to breath. At one point, the younger fighter stepped in too fast. Dax touched his arm, just gently, redirected the motion off center, then stepped back, offered space. No punishment, just clarity. The crowd didn't cheer. They watched, still, present. Some leaned forward in their seats without realizing it, because what they were seeing wasn't a match. It was a ritual, one that didn't need judges, one that didn't need to be won. They moved like music. Dax lowered his stance once, inviting the other forward. The younger fighter paused, then stepped in with care. 2 exchanges passed. Light taps, clean blocks. Then at the right moment, both men stepped back at the same time. No signal, just awareness. They bowed together. No winner, no scoreboard, just respect. The applause came slowly. It started as a murmur, then grew not loud but warm, steady, a sound that came from somewhere deeper than approval. It was not for a victory. It was for presence, for restraint, for the grace in stillness. Dax walked off the mat without looking back. He didn't need to. The moment was complete, and it didn't belong to him. It belonged to the practice, and the silence it left behind. The gravel crunched beneath Dax's tires as he pulled into the clearing. The wind stirred softly through the pines, but the cabin stood still. No smoke curled from the chimney. He stepped out and waited a moment with his hand on the car door. He already knew. The porch creaked under his boots as he climbed the steps. The door was unlocked. He opened it gently, like entering someone's memory. The inside looked the same. The firewood stack was lower. A few of the tea jars were empty, but everything else remained in place. Dax didn't call out. He walked through the main room, touching nothing. The air was cold, but not unfriendly. He found a kettle on the stove, clean and dry. Beside it, a folded cloth and a pair of worn reading glasses. On the floor of the dojo, the mat had been swept. The cushion sat centered where it always did, and on top of it, a single piece of folded paper. Dax stepped forward and knelt slowly. He picked it up. The paper was soft with age but carefully creased. The ink was steady, written in a familiar hand. Now that you no longer need my voice, you might begin to hear your own. Dax held the note for a long time, not because he didn't understand, but because he did. He placed the paper back where it had been. Then he stood and walked to the small shelf by the window. He opened the drawer, pulled out a bundle of incense, and lit a single stick. The smoke curled up slowly like a breath that took its time. He set it near the window, then returned to the mat. He bowed, low, deep, with everything that didn't need to be said. Then he sat. His knees pressed into the familiar cushion, his spine rising tall without tension. His hands rested in his lap, his eyes closed. And in that quiet room, with the mountain wind outside and no one watching, Dax listened. Not for footsteps, not for words, just for what remained. And there, in the final silence, it was enough.